Well, hello and welcome to the Jeffrey Daugherty Show. I am Jeffrey Daugherty, and right from the beginning, if you want to contact me, you can email me, Jeffrey, that's Jeffrey, at imnck.com. You can also visit my website, www.imnck.com, N like in new, C like in cosmic, K like in knowledge, www.imnck.com. Follow me on Twitter at NCKabbalah. Like me on Facebook under Jeff A. Daugherty and the Jeff Daugherty Show. That will enable you to stay in touch, stay in tune. And I would like to ask you a personal favor. Go to my Facebook or my Twitter and watch that little video link that's on there. I am trying to win free copies of my book to take them on the NCK tour. That'll be a great source of revenue to get that tour kicked off as soon as possible. I also would welcome you to buy the book, Apostle Paul Antichrist, but at the very least would ask you to do me the personal favor and watch that video. And if you have to watch it several times in order to get the full gist, please do so. It is a contest based on number of views of that video. So please go and watch it. It's a 2-minute video. 2 minutes out of your day would be a tremendous help to me. If you do want to buy the book, I do have it on sale right now for $15.99. You can buy it through imnck.com. $15.99 for a special, because I was on a radio show Saturday night called Above Top Secret Live, and it was a great show. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed especially that it had a very international perspective. One of the hosts was in Australia, one of the hosts was in England, and they had another host that was in the United States. So it provided a really nice cross-cultural frame of reference, and of course a nice cross-cultural audience as well. And it was a very good interview. It was only supposed to be an hour. We did go over. Lots of great questions, not just questions specifically about the book, but more about the philosophy behind the book, more about, the different and varying theories. Some people believe that Paul was not an individual person, but was a conglomeration, if you will, of different individuals. And if that were true, the bottom line is that whether it was a man or whether it was a conglomeration of people, the doctrine that he or they instituted and spread was demonic, devilish, dastardly, and downright mean, and it certainly needs to be exposed, and that's what we're doing with the book, ApostlePaulAntichrist.com. If you haven't heard, it is a novel, fact-based, fact-filled novel about how Paul hijacked the original teachings of Jesus to create a fear-based control matrix. It really expands on Thomas Jefferson's belief and proclamation that Paul was the first great corrupter of the doctrines of Jesus. So check that out. Check all those places out. Watch that video. I will be indebted to you. I also want to mention that next week I'm working on putting together a very special show. Hopefully it'll be a 3-way video chat such as this one today, but at the very least a 2-way video chat, and I may have to summarize. Sorry, I had an itch in my ear. I may have to summarize the position of the third person. I'd like to have Christina Ray and Dr. Andy Toltek join me for a discussion about the spiritual realm and the entities that inhabit it. I think it'd be a fascinating discussion if we could have Dr. Toltek on. He is a psychiatrist, an MD, and a shaman. He does live south of the border, though, so he does have some issues with his connectivity. And basically, he would take a very strong point of view on one end of the spectrum, that almost everything we deal with in the spiritual realm is malevolent and seeks our harm. Christina Ray works with angels and angel cards. She would be more on the other end of the spectrum that says everything we deal with is kinder and gentler and wants to help us. And I have a feeling that I may come down somewhere in the middle. And I think it'll be a fascinating discussion. So we're going to do that next week, talking about the spirit realm and the entities that inhabit it. This week, a couple of very interesting things to talk about. First of all, I was asked on Above Top Secret Live what I thought about original sin. Very interesting question. Jeff, what do you think about original sin? Well, very succinctly, I think it was the original lie. But to go into it a little bit more, original sin, if you don't know, is the belief that because of the transgression of Adam and Eve, each one of us from that time forward has been born with original sin. In other words, we've been born guilty. So we are guilty until we prove ourselves innocent. And of course, we can only prove ourselves innocent by doing some things that they want us to do. But original sin basically says that we are all born sinners because of the transgression of Adam and Eve. And of course, the doctrine of original sin places us into a collective state of guilt as a species. But it goes beyond that. Original sin says we're all guilty from the sin that Adam committed. And surprise, surprise, the modern proclamation and prevalence of this doctrine goes back to the poison pen of the Apostle Paul, who wrote that we are all dead through Adam. But don't worry, if you follow his beliefs about Jesus, you can be made alive again. Funny, because Jesus said you already are alive from the beginning, but I get ahead of myself. Original sin says because of the sin of Adam, we are all guilty. And we all suffer from something that's called concupiscence. Now, follow this and tell me where you think it came from. Because you are born with original sin, because you are a dirty, rotten scoundrel, then most of the desires that are natural to you are also dirty, rotten, and scoundrel-ish. That's what concupiscence is, that you have unnatural, fleshly, fallen desires because of your being born with original sin. So the things that you come up with on your own, the things that you desire on your own, they're obviously bad because you were born bad. And what does that do? It creates a little chain. Original sin equals collective guilt. Any thoughts outside of that chain are concupiscence or evil desires, which all serves to keep you under control. If you start to say, wait a minute, how could I be guilty of something that I never committed? Well, that's concupiscence. That's an evil thought and desire. Stop it. If you start to desire, but wait a minute, if I was designed in the image of God, how could I be bad? See, all those things, any original thought, any individual thought, any empowering thought that gets you out of from under the control of those that are in charge is concupiscence, and it's bad, and you should not be doing it. And of course, Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is in you. You don't have original sin. You have the original spark of the divinity born within you. That's the real difference between Jeff Daugherty, New Cosmic Knowledge, and the Jeff Daugherty that used to be a Pentecostal evangelist. That's Jeff Daugherty's greatest crime, is saying that you are not born with original sin, as Paul taught. You are born with the original spark of divinity, as Jesus taught. Paul said that you're born a sinner. Jesus said you're born with the kingdom of heaven within you. You are free to believe whichever you choose. My job is just to make sure that you know and understand that you do have a choice. So that's what I think about original sin. Now, we start talking about Paul being in error. We start talking about Thomas Jefferson, who said that the New Testament was really a field of dung with a few diamonds, which are the words of Jesus, littered amongst and within that dung. And our job is to go through and pick out the diamonds of Jesus while not being corrupted by the dung of man-made teachings, thoughts, beliefs. And we also, I believe, are tasked to go outside the New Testament to find the truths of Jesus, because they are contained within other documents. Let me be clear. The New Testament does contain the Word of God. The New Testament does contain the words of Jesus. It also contains a lot of other stuff. Thomas Jefferson called it dung. I'll just call it garbage. And as we become more and more enlightened, as we get access to more and more information, that becomes more and more obvious as we look and we are able to get on the internet and access all of the combined knowledge of human history. We're able to understand that the Romans went and destroyed much of the original documentation from the Jesus era. In fact, they destroyed every bit of it they could get their hands on. And thus, everything that we think about that. Think about that for a minute. Whoa! Let's stop a minute. Jesus, don't know if he wrote anything himself. That's an interesting thought. Did Jesus write anything himself? And the people around him, who obviously did write things, wrote things down, handed things out to the churches. They were called letters. First one was the book of James. And they wrote these things out. And with the destruction of Jerusalem and the rise of Pauline Christianity, the Roman Church systematically destroyed every shred of original literature from the pen of the original apostles of Jesus, and if there were any, from the pen of Jesus himself. Think about that. They destroyed everything they could get their hands on. So everything that we read today in the New Testament, in the Bible, that's a big Bible. You can tell I was a holy guy because I had my name on my Bible. Everything we read in the New Testament has been, first of all, run through the Roman imperial filter. Everything they didn't like, they simply destroyed. Then it came down into the 1600s and went through the English imperial filter, through the King James Translation Committee. And of course, from the Roman times down to the English times, they still were destroying everything that they found that was original. The cover story is, well, they would copy down the old one and destroy the old one, and they had a newer copy. That's called in the Greek baloney. It's called BS. It's just a bunch of crap. Either way, all the originals were destroyed by the Roman powers that be, down through the ages by the other powers that be, and finally they went through the English powers that be. And so basically what we have today in the New Testament has gone through two imperial filters, one in Rome, one in England, and now we're left with what they want us to have, with a very few exceptions of some acts of intrepidity on the part of some translators, to leave some nuggets in there, as Jefferson says, some diamonds among this dunghill that has been produced by the masters of not one but two empires, and we are now left with what they, by and large, want us to hear. That's why we're beginning to see and know and understand that there are mistakes within the Bible, there are contradictions within the Bible, there are outright absurdities within the Bible. The Bible does contain the Word of God. It is not the Word of God. The Bible does contain the words of Jesus. It is not the words of Jesus. And anyone with more than 2 or 3 functioning brain cells, if you could get one of them to think on an independent level, you will understand this. That just doesn't mean that there's no God. It doesn't mean there's no Jesus. It just means that there is no A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. Here you go. You don't have to think on yourself. Just do this type of approach to true godliness. I'm sorry. But you cannot find, there's no book. I'm looking at my bookshelf, dummies. You're not going to find a book that says true spirituality for dummies. And if you do find one, well, it's not worth the paper that it's written on, because the fact is dummies can't find true spirituality because it's work. Perhaps that's why so few people engage in it. But at any rate, it doesn't mean that there's no reality. It doesn't mean that there's no spirituality. It doesn't mean that there's no words of Jesus, words of God. It just means that they're not conveniently contained in one place, unless you want to believe the passed down, thoroughly annotated and emasculated through not one but two empire version of the New Testament that we have today. If you want to believe that, that's totally up to you. I'm trying to put out some information to make the rest of you that might want to say, wow, not quite sure about this. But one thing, as we change gears, let me just turn to this side as we shift gears. One thing that has surprised me is that, in spite of the fact that we're beginning to realize that the Bible does have very serious issues as we have received it today, and just a little note, there are words of Jesus and words of God in many other places other than the Bible. And here, this is interesting. I want to go back to where the Romans destroyed all of the writings of the original apostles and Jesus, if he wrote any. There were some that got outside the walls of Jerusalem before Jerusalem was destroyed. They were kept in the caves in Qumran and are now coming to us as the Dead Sea Scrolls. And how interesting is it? How interesting is it that every single document from the New Testament era that is found outside the walls of Jerusalem paints Paul as a usurper? The Dead Sea Scrolls say Paul was the great spouter of lies. Many of the Dead Sea Scrolls question whether Jesus was actually crucified, which is another thing that should make you go, But every single document that survived the onslaught of destruction from the Roman Empire, such as the Gospel of the Holy 12, which was housed in a monastery in Tibet until it was discovered. There's also one, that Billy Meyer found. It's totally up to you whether you want to believe that, but it also paints a very different picture of Jesus and the apostles. Talmud of Emmanuel. But it's funny that everything that survived the Roman purge talks about Paul as a liar and usurper of the doctrine. And they all also question whether Jesus actually died on the cross. Don't question whether he was a savior, but question whether he died on the cross or not. Fascinating points to ponder. The party line is that Paul was a great apostle. Everything outside of the party line, everything that survived the Roman and English purge, says Paul was an imposter. Very, very interesting. And it's a shock to me that even though we understand these problems with the Bible, the one doctrine of the Bible that seems to have universal acceptance and that seems to be questioned by no one is the whole apocalypse / Revelation scenario. We all seem to be convinced that there's a horrible end coming to this world. We all seem to be convinced that there's fiery hail and bloods of river and demon locusts and severe persecution coming on this planet. As much as we understand and know and question the rest of the Bible, why are we giving almost universal carte blanche to this idea of an apocalypse? What if there is no apocalypse? And why would we expect the Bible teaching about the apocalypse to be any more accurate than the Bible teaching about any other subject? If there's shown to be gaps, holes, outright absurdities, mistranslations, and contradictions in all the other teachings of the Bible, why then would there not be holes, gaps, absurdities, outright lies, and mistranslations of the Bible reckonings of the apocalypse and the Revelation scenario? Why do we continue to give it almost universal carte blanche? Is it time for us to rethink our ideas about the apocalypse and the Revelation scenario? Let me ask you a couple of questions about it. Who really benefits from us believing and holding to the apocalyptic scenario of the Bible? Well, let's think about it. What does the apocalyptic scenario of the Bible really promote? Number one, it promotes fear. Man, you read that stuff and it scares you to death. It's very promoting of fear. Who wins when you are in fear? Well, you don't, because it's impossible for you to ascend when you're in fear. It's impossible for you to live in faith when you are in fear. So the proclamation and propagation of the apocalyptic Revelation scenario benefits those who would be benefited by us staying fearful and having our ascension limited or stopped in its tracks. Also, the fear of a coming crisis would want us to turn to help from church leaders and from religious leaders that can protect us. So I think there you have a very clear indication of who could be the real beneficiaries of this fearful, scary apocalyptic scenario. Those that don't want us to ascend, those that want us to stay under control and turn to them, i.e. the churches and the political structures of this world. It keeps us in fear. It blocks us from our ascension. And here's what else it does. Let's assume for a moment that it's not true. Let's make that assumption. Let's assume for a moment, for sake of discussion, that the biblical apocalyptic / Revelation scenario is untrue. But for 2,000 years, we've had it hammered into us that it is true. And now Hollywood and media are generating, disaster epic, religious epic, revelation type epic after revelation type epic that further pounds it into our consciousness. And if we all begin to think about it and project our intention, it's going to be bad, it's going to be bad, it's going to be bad, those thoughts coalesce into quite possibly thought forms and thought entities and spiritual vibrations and power that will possibly create some type of a bad scenario. So by getting us to think about it as much as possible, they exponentially create the probability of something of that nature actually occurring, or at least seeming to occur. But let me ask you something, folks. Even if the apocalyptic Revelation scenario was true, why should you really care? If you are busy about your Father's business, if you are busy following the words of Jesus and cultivating the kingdom of heaven which is in you, finding your way back to the Father, then you've realized that this body is nothing but a tool that you are now using in this particular incarnation in which you're in. And if fire does fall from heaven and burn this thing up, no big deal. It's just graduation day. You move on to another level of consciousness. It's fearing the Revelation apocalypse scenario is as ridiculous as fearing death, because to us that are ascending, death is nothing but another step. It's not death of us, because we're spirits who are eternal. It's only death of this body, which we happen to be using at this time. And of course, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, they're all trying to get you focused on this body, this thing that they say is the temple. This body is not the temple. You are the spirit, and you're driving this body. You're using this body. So even if the Revelation scenario came true, shouldn't matter to me and you, because we are on the path of ascension. But here's a final thought to share with you. What if they are trying to get us to fear our victory? What if they are trying to get us to fear our victory? What if the Revelation apocalyptic scenario is not going to come true? What if it's not a fiery, horrible end for us? What if it is a victorious, monumental victory for us at the end? What if it's a positive end that is to come and not a horrible end that is to come? What's going to happen when enough of us, when the 100th monkey comes on board and the corporate combined synergy of our spiritual energy kicks in and we ascend to another stage of evolution, to another being, to another wavelength, whatever? What if, when that happens, how could it be bad for us? Well, it's not bad for us, but if all of a sudden all of the people that have spiritually ascended are gone to another level of existence, what of the existence that is left behind? What of the plane that is left behind? What of the place that is left behind? What if all of a sudden all the thinkers and all the ascended ones are gone and this plane of existence is left to its own devices? Maybe that's what they really fear. They know that it's only going to be bad for them after we have our victory. So they're trying to do everything they can to keep us from understanding, realizing, and moving on to our ultimate victory, which is the corporate move of the species to another level, to another plane, to a better place as we continue our development as beings. Well, that's a lot to think about, but I hope it will give you some ideas for possibly changing your perspective and help you to understand that, you know what? Maybe it's not all going to be bad, and maybe there's a reason why they're trying to make me think it is. Next week, look forward to that great show about the spiritual realm and the entities that populate it. If you want to talk to me in the interim, Jeffrey at IamNCK.com. Visit me at IamNCK.com, at NC Kabbalah on Twitter, Jeff A. Daugherty, and The Jeff Daugherty Show on Facebook. Until then, as always, Jeffrey Daugherty wishing you peace and light.